is some silage cut already, but I suppose the reason I'm going to talk about it today is I think we tend to forget a little bit about silage quality. We only think of silage quality at the time that we're using the silage, and we're disappointed maybe in a lot of cases as to how the silage has worked out for us. So as a result, I just think that we talk about silage planning, and Joe often talks about it, about trying to have a strategy around silage, and that's fine, that's grand, but that's not much good to us right now, because it's not going to we can't do a whole pile to control things at the moment. What we can control at the moment is our cutting date, I suppose, and the influence that that can have on silage quality is quite dramatic. So I'm just going to go through a few bits on that. I suppose we'll say the whole preservation piece, I'll touch slightly on it maybe, but I would be hoping to talk to Francis Quigley and Tom Fallon there in the next couple of days as well around the whole management of the pit and how that can influence feed out quality as well, maybe in the next week or two as well. So cutting for quality silage, right? I suppose all of this, if you want to get further information on it, is in an excellent document that we produced a couple of years ago. So if you just Google the Teagasc Silage Manual, you'll find a PDF called Quality Grass Silage for Dairy and Beef Production Systems, a best practice guide, and it's a very, very good read, and I would recommend it to anyone to have a look through that. Now, what I would say, I suppose, is that from the point of view of obviously the dependence that we have on grazed grass as a system of production in Ireland, obviously we're quite good at growing grass and getting better every year probably, and the utilisation aspect of it, I suppose, we're constantly improving. And the one thing I would say, I suppose, is that we're probably, I would generally find that we probably have, because we're so focused on growing grass and that our production system is based on grazed grass, we probably don't put enough emphasis on silage quality. And so we're good at growing grass and maybe terrible at making silage in a way. Whereas when you look at, we'll say maybe Northern Ireland, there's a lot more focus put on silage, and they do good quality silage. And maybe even in the Dutch systems as well, and on the continent, obviously, where they're housed, and the silage is an important part of their diet the whole way around, they have a lot of focus on silage quality. So I think that stems probably, and you can understand why, from a quota scenario many years ago. There was very little justification to have high quality silage, because in a lot of cases cows were being dried off early in order to stay under quota, etc. So that from a condition point of view, they didn't really need high quality silage, and we'll come to that in a second. But as we've moved into that non-quota era, and obviously the capacity or the potential is there to milk on late into the season, the need for quality silage on farm has increased dramatically, for milking cows in particular. And of course, there's always been a requirement for good quality silage for young stock, and the role that that has to play in hitting targets in terms of weight gain, etc., are very important. So just what are the benefits of good silage planning? And that's what that manual is covering, is I suppose the whole piece around planning for silage for the whole year. How much do you need? How much of each type do you need? I suppose you could get bogged down in it, but I would think that you should be aiming to make quality silage every time you make silage in reality, because with the best will in the world, as you can see there, weather is challenging at the moment, so there could be potential that harvesting date could be a little bit later than you might initially plan. And as a result, if you're planning for moderate quality silage and you get delayed, you end up being down here then at poor quality silage, and there's a negative associated with that, both in terms of intake and quality and so forth. So what are the benefits of good silage planning and having good silage? Obviously, quite clearly, there's a reduced concentrate feeding element to it, and that's across dairy milking cows and young stock that for growth targets, and beef cattle as well. You get an improvement in milk solids yield. So there are some farms that are quite good at making silage, and actually I know of one case where I used to see a situation where when the cows actually went to grass, they used to take a bit of a dip in performance because the silage quality was so good. I suppose the focus on that farm was on having really good silage, and maybe the grass quality mightn't have been as good at the time. So there was actually, the cows went backwards when they went out a small bit. Improved cow condition at calving. Obviously, the management of body condition is an important element of how the whole cyclical system of spring calving works. And obviously, good silage is going to lend itself to good cow condition. Now, there is a caveat. Obviously, Joe spoke to us earlier in the year as well around the whole cows being over fat and how that can influence conditions such as ketosis and milk fever as well. But in general, I think I probably prefer to be trying to reduce the amount of high quality silage being fed and trying to supplement a poor quality silage. That's my own opinion anyway. In terms of better herd fertility, that's tied into number 3 with the cow condition. And as I said, replacement heifers a target weight that's going to be driven by high quality silage intake over their first winter, reduced concentrate intake in many cases where silage quality is good and protein levels are sufficient. Heifers can achieve those target weights without having to be fed high levels of feed, which is obviously a cost saving. Improved daily gain then for anyone that has stock or for cattle, and that's, I suppose that's true for any young stock that are on the farm, or any type of stock that are on the farm. They're obviously, the better intake from a better quality feed is going to improve their daily gain. Shorter finishing periods obviously as well. So if we have better quality silage with a higher energy dense diet, it can result in a shorter period of feeding to achieve the finish cover of fat and carcass target as well. And funnily enough, I suppose, and this is counterintuitive, or this can sometimes be counterintuitive, higher annual grass yield by better planning of silage. So what we will see over the next number of weeks is, and particularly as we move into June, you'll see big cuts of silage taken off the ground that hasn't been grazed all year potentially so far. Huge cut of silage taken off of it, field white for 2 to 3 weeks. Then it starts to green up again, and the second cut will be probably touching into mid to late August. By the time there's any sort of recovery on that field, this is going to be well out into September. So the potential for any kind of significant level of grazing off of outside blocks of silage ground in those kind of scenarios is limited. Probably only going to get one grazing, whereas earlier cut first cuts lead to earlier cut second cuts, allow for potential third cuts if necessary, and also allow for greater level of grazing in the back end of the year. So overall, the amount of grass that's grown on silage ground can be increased by planning it better in order to get better quality silage, as well as increasing the overall grass production off that block. In terms of the target silage DMD, it seems strange to be talking about this on the 13th to 14th of May, but just to, I suppose, as I said, just to refocus the mind in terms of what are we trying to achieve, or in the next couple of weeks when we go to cut the silage. If you are in an autumn calving situation, you're going to need really high quality silage, obviously, because you're trying to produce milk from cows that are in the early stages of lactation, obviously at that point, and they need a higher energy level completely compared to that. We'll say your 74 then is kind of a very good 72 to 74 kind of is a good quality silage that you're going to need for your spring calvers there to buffer them during the month of February. And also you could argue that silage is needed, there's probably no argument there, or is that silage is going to be needed during the month of November and into December as well. Because as we look at the grass situation, you'll see more and more farms, because of stocking rates creeping up a little bit, that the grass situation is finishing up the 7th to the 14th of November. There was a time that maybe was going to the 7th of December when there wasn't as high stocking rates maybe on milking platforms. And we didn't need that kind of silage to come into the system. Now we do need good quality silage at the back end of the year as well. So we're looking at possibly having the equivalent of 2 to 3 bales of high quality silage to cover that late autumn, early spring period, to make sure that there's adequate silage available for cows. But again, I think we should be aiming to try to make as much high quality silage as possible in order to get somewhere in this window, I suppose, that you're going to hit where you want to be. In terms of then the young stock, as I said already, they need high quality silage. We need to drive their performance as much as possible, and if we can do it from a minimal concentrate input, obviously that's done at a cheaper rate, rather than having to feed heavily during that first winter in order to achieve live weight gain targets, so that heifers can be bred at the right stage. And obviously weaning cattle then as well, you can often see, I suppose, if you look at marts, and I suppose the advantage of the pandemic has been that you can view these mart sales online. Obviously, you can see the difference in, almost tell the reason why some stock are better than others. We'll say you could have an animal born on the 1st of March 2020 being sold there in recent times, and one weighing an awful lot more than the other, probably down to a combination of both better grassland management and actually better stock management and better silage over the course of the winter, that they've had greater levels of gain throughout the winter period, and obviously that weight then translates into a better price for that person selling that animal as well. So it's a win-win to make sure that we have quality silage on the farm. The 70 type DMD stuff, I suppose, and as I said, people can often try to plan to make this 68, 70 DMD, and then we end up in this 66 or less situation down here. So that's suitable for a dry dairy cow that's drying off in good body condition score, or your dry dairy cow in poor body condition needs that slightly higher quality silage. Suckler cows and milk, for any of you that have those, maybe would need that 70 DMD silage as well. And then that 66 material is what a dry suckler cow needs. They're inclined to put on a lot of condition. But again, because we're milking later into the year now, not limited by quota, cows' condition, and obviously, again, the whole, if you get a bad month of October, maybe you all know how quickly cows can melt in tough scenarios there where their intake has been compromised by poor weather, that they can lose a bit of condition in spite of what levels of feeding they're maybe getting at the time while milking. So good quality silage is an important piece of the jigsaw as far as I'm concerned, because in many cases, we have people that are using silage for definitely 4 months and possibly even up to 5 months of the year. So that needs to be high quality silage in that scenario. This, I suppose, is what I want to focus on in particular this morning. It's that growth stage and how it influences silage quality. So the temptation is always there to leave a crop bulk up. And as I said, that results in a big load of silage, which is great, I suppose, from the point of view of you're happy that you're getting value for money out of the contractor at that stage, in terms of the quantity of silage that he's expected to draw for whatever charge he's charging. But the downside of that is that the quality is deteriorating the more we move on. So I suppose just, I'm quite conscious of the fact that given the month of April that we've had, in some cases people have grazed their silage crops even and are now trying to start from scratch again. And I'm going to touch on that in a second. But in reality, we still, we have to be very aware of the growth and the impact of growth now over the next number of weeks. So definitely a lot milder in the last day or two. I know we've been up and down. There's been a touch of a northerly wind there in the last couple of days as well, which has made it a little bit cooler again than anticipated. But at the same time, Additives figures for grass growth for the coming week are in the region of 60 to 80. And I suppose if you factor that in then for a silage ground, a bit of silage ground that's closed, that could actually be potentially growing up to 150, 160 kilos a day. So quite quickly your silage crop has the potential to bulk up. So it's probably important in that context to keep an eye on your crop of silage, because it can very quickly move from one stage to the next. So look, I think the people that are looking to take quality silage, some of them have moved already. I've seen, as I said already, silage crops were cut last week when the weather was good. But they weren't grazed, hadn't been grazed since the back end of last year. And it's the right thing to do was to get those off early. So they were in this, probably in this stage. The crops that I saw last week were kind of just between this phase here. So that should result in good quality silage for that farm. We're just trying to watch out for this. So just as the head is beginning to emerge, or the seed head is beginning to emerge on the crop, this is where we want to be in order to have that 71, 72 DMD. And we move very quickly, I suppose, and it's important to note this from this stage into this stage. And you can see the deterioration that comes in quality then. And as we move into this high, bulky density crop with a very, very clear seed head on it, and also the bend, as you can see down low, because of the weight of the crop up above it, the quality of the silage that we're now harvesting has deteriorated quite quickly. And again, along the bottom here, and as I said, it's in the manual if you want to look it up. It's just emphasizing what each of these categories are, what this looks like, and what that feeds back into in terms of the cows that you're trying to feed subsequently. So I suppose we need to be trying to aim to cut in this area here, ideally, and maybe a proportion of the crop needs to be in this stage in order to have the high quality silage for the back end as we run into dry off, and then in the early spring phase when we're not fully reliant on the grass situation, because we just can't have enough grass on the farm at that stage. Okay, so I suppose it's just to be the other thing that you have to be aware of, and as I said, just given the month of April that we've had, and because it's kind of slowed the growth of crops and so forth, you just can't forget that seed crops are going to go to seed. Their nature, especially in silage crops, is that they're probably going to start to head out from the 25th of May onwards, probably. And in some cases where people have used intermediate varieties, they could actually start to head a bit sooner. So as soon as that head starts to emerge, most of you will probably be wondering about nitrate levels and so forth like that. But at the same time, as I said, given those crops could potentially be growing well in excess of 100 now, where there's cover and there's a bit of warmth in the ground as a result of that cover, they will use up their nitrogen. The other thing is, I suppose, spoke to John Maher about this the other day as well, and he would say that Pádraig O'Reilly, who's now retired from Grange, who was well known for his research into silage, would have had nitrate level as being fifth on the list, or fifth or sixth on his list of priorities in terms of importance around cutting. So if we can get the sugars right, get the crop cut dry, it actually has the potential to outweigh any potential loss nitrogen that can be still in the crop, and obviously then that feeds into better quality silage. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem with feed out because of the nitrate, because sugar levels have managed to ensure adequate fermentation. So I think we just need to be watching that seed head emergence. I suppose the problem that we run into, especially with pit silage in particular, is that the crop can be at different stages across the farm. And I suppose from that point of view, I think we need to be looking at strategies, especially if we're using pits, to make pits more accessible, that we can either have more pits available to us to make different types of silage, or that we're in a position to open a pit very quickly and cut at different stages, so that we're not aiming that we're trying to cut massive crops or massive areas of silage all in one day. You know, that mightn't suit everybody. Obviously, it mightn't suit a contractor to be coming and going, but maybe it might. But just that we can actually open silage pits very quickly. So I think the way we cover silage pits is something that we need to look at as well. And the speed that they can be opened is something that people should look at as well. Okay, so just again, this is emphasizing the role of the date of cutting or the time of cutting and how it impacts on the crop yield. So obviously, the longer we leave it there, the bigger the crop is going to be. That stands to reason, I suppose. There's a lot of material growing, but the digestibility, as you know, no different to graze grass. The greater the bulk, basically, the lower the digestibility. So we get a kind of a plateau point here around the 5th or 6th of June. And this one, I probably would say that it could be even earlier than that, where our digestible yield of dry matter starts to drop. So in reality, because we now have this high, big, bulky crop of silage, we're not actually getting, when you look at it on a dry matter basis, the value that you're getting is no longer as good as you would have thought. Okay, obviously there's a higher return, I suppose, in terms of it's costing less per ton when we get to this stage where we've a bit more bulk, but our dry matter yield isn't being affected as significantly. But when we start to lose that digestible dry matter yield, cost of silage is increasing then, because you're now producing a crop that isn't really that digestible, obviously, to stock. It's a subsistence living scenario, and you may be supplementing this in order to try and keep stock on targets. Okay, so just bear that in mind. And I suppose the other thing to bear in mind is that people often ask the question, especially in years like this, generally first cut crops would be perceived to be the biggest, and that would be correct in general. But where it's delaying the first cut date now will increase the bulk of silage that will be there for our first cut without a doubt. However, when we look at it then in context of a first and second cut combined, delaying that first cut in order to increase the bulk of it doesn't actually increase the volume of silage that will be cut overall. So you're actually better off moving early as soon as you can, basically, in the first cut scenario. Start from scratch, reset the dial with your second cut, and your second cut will actually make up for any potential reduction that you may have encountered on your first cut. Okay. Just again, I suppose the emphasis on soil fertility, and again, depending on maybe some places you mightn't be taking a second cut off of some of the ground, and soil fertility may need to be addressed on it. So soil fertility influences cutting date by virtue of the fact that with good soil fertility, you get grass growing better, and it reaches its correct stage earlier. And again, this is emphasizing that if we have good soil fertility, we hit our target crop yield and are in or around our silage dry matter digestibility that we're trying to achieve here around the 25th or 26th of May. Whereas if we don't have good soil fertility, we'll find a scenario where we walk a crop on an anticipated cutting date of around the 25th or 26th, are a little bit disappointed with how it has performed, decide to leave it there to bulk up, and that's fine. It achieves its bulk all right, but our quality deteriorates quite dramatically in that 2-week window then that we're waiting for it to achieve that extra bulk. I suppose just to emphasize, given that the weather is broken, again, the impact of wilting now. So I suppose some people will be watching for a window of opportunity to cut silage in the next week or 10 days. How you cut it and how you manage it when it is cut is going to influence the dry matter of that crop. And obviously, we want to try and have high quality, high dry matter silage, obviously, because it's going to lend itself to better performance. So I suppose your 6 meter row kind of scenario is your big swart cut by your big M or your triple moors and all put into one swart in one go. So research that was done in Grange a number of years ago looked at cutting this crop with the likes of your big M, cutting it in your 10-foot swarts with your big M or your triple moor, but just not swarting it, and then taking out your 3 swarts as well. 24 hours would be generally the recommended wilting period. You can see that if you cut with a big M and swart it straight away, basically put it into one big row, you're not going to get much of a change in dry matter over a 24-hour wilt, and even over the 48-hour, you're only getting 5 points of a change in dry matter there. Whereas you're getting in the 3 meter row, so just leaving it in the swart, doing nothing with it, you get it to 23% dry matter within the 24 hours, and you can get up to 31% in the 48 hours. Tating it then obviously would make sense because you're spreading it out. You're obviously logically going to get it to dry quicker as a result of that. So 24-hour wilt with a tate is going to take you up to 30% dry matter. Leaving it then for 48 hours is taking you to 50% dry matter. And this is in red for a reason, because that's going to be excessively dry for a pit scenario. You will probably get away with baling that kind of material, but in some cases that could be possibly too dry. So I suppose it's a combination. If you are tating, you probably don't need to tate for too long. Some people are probably inclined to turn silage crops maybe 1 or 2 times, and that can make it excessively dry. And especially for pit silage, that's a negative, because we now have potential for a lot of air pockets to develop within the pit. Very hard to roll that pit if you're driving the loader, and it means that your insolubility is compromised then, basically, because you have air pockets developing. You want to limit the air that's in the pit as quickly as possible. So I suppose if we're in a rush to try and get this done, maybe cut into your 3 meter rows and tate it out and pick it up within the 24-hour period is going to give you high dry matter silage for your pit, or your bale even for that matter. If we're just, I suppose we have to maybe look for, in order to try and get decent quality dry matter silage, we're probably looking at this scenario here probably rather than this scenario, because you're actually losing a share of your sugars and your quality in the field by leaving it there too long also. So we're probably trying to dry the crop as quickly as possible in a shorter space of time and get it into the pit then, obviously, or into your bales as quickly as possible, okay? So just see, there's a question in there. There's a question in here about trying to get contractors to charge by the ton. They pay by the ton in Holland so that they can go for top quality. I'm afraid I have no influence over that, so that's up to people to discuss. I know there are contractors that are willing to talk to people or will do deals with people on lighter crops that they're not charging the full price per acre, maybe because obviously they're not carrying the same bulk of stuff. But look, that's on a case-by-case basis, I suppose. But I think you probably have to be willing to, I don't know how best to describe it. I think the trade-off isn't as bad as people necessarily perceive. So going for the bulk, you perceive that you're getting better value, but when you look at it on a dry matter basis, actually, in terms of the quality of the silage that you're getting, you're not getting that greater value when you wait for that big bulky crop. I suppose to answer your question then, Kevin, I suppose if you're looking for real quality, you're going to be cutting at lower levels. Then bales possibly come into the role, into that position there, because obviously, for example, say a bale is costing somewhere between 15 and 20 euros a bale, and you're cutting at 6 bales to the acre generally is kind of what you're looking at for kind of high quality silage. You're looking at 60 90 to 120 euros an acre there, kind of for that scenario. 90 euros an acre, I suppose, for a 6-bale crop costing 15 euros a bale, which is obviously going to be cheaper maybe than pit silage being charged at 130 euros an acre or 120 euros an acre, as you'd often see. But again, I suppose it just, as I said, in terms of what you're paying for and what you're getting, you're getting two different things. When you get that really bulky crop, you're getting a lot of silage, but you're not getting the quality. Whereas when you cut that slightly lower bulk crop, you're getting a lot higher quality. So in terms of value for money, there is very little difference in it when you look at it down in kind of the nuts and bolts of it. Okay, when is the time to head out straight away or leave for a couple of hours? I probably would say, Pierce, there in that scenario, that if you're tedding, you're trying to dry it as quickly as possible, basically, to get it in. So I think ted it out immediately. The sooner you ted it, obviously, if we go back here, hopefully I can go back here. Yeah, the sooner you ted it here, the quicker you're going to get to this point, or maybe slightly higher, maybe if you're looking for it. So I suppose in general, guys are cutting crops early, and they're trying to they obviously want to get going then as well, to start picking up the crops. I know contractors that I talk to around this area always give out to us for telling people that they should be cutting in the afternoon, because obviously everybody looking for them to cut the afternoon limits today, that they can kind of get done then as well. So just, I suppose, if you cut the crop, ted it out very quickly, it means that you get to this phase potentially quicker than 24 hours even as well. And it'll allow you to get on and get the job done as quick as possible. Another question in then, can you make good quality silage from older grass swards, or does it need to be newer grass? That's a good comment. I suppose the timing of the cutting is going to be important. If it's very old grass, the tendency is that it's going to be a kind of a low to the ground, dirty kind of a swart that you're going to end up with. Not probably the highest quality grasses in those older swards. So the quality of it is going to be compromised in that sense. But I suppose it doesn't have to be brand new reseed. So like 10-year-old reseeded ground managed well and still produce good quality silage. But yes, definitely your older type, and you'll all see it there as you go around the country, those old meadows, literally hay meadow type stuff being cut for silage. No matter what stage of the year you're going to cut that at, it's not going to make high quality silage. But again, cutting it on time is going to be the difference between being not too much better than straw in terms of feeding value and actually having some sort of a feeding value as well. So there's just another question in then just before I move on. This year, slurry applied in March and early April with a trailing shoe still present in lines, especially around the wheel tracks. The dry crust is lifting in the grass. Would you be concerned about contamination in the pit? And if so, is there anything that can be done now to minimize any risk of contamination / preservation? Yeah, that's a good question, Aidan. I suppose given the dry April, of course, it's been a problem that the slurry hasn't gotten broken down. There isn't very much you can do about it in the meantime, to be honest. So unfortunately, there is, I think you probably might try to get them to cut a little bit slightly higher, maybe not to be pulling it up if possible. We might be lucky that the rain that's falling there now, we're getting heavy outbursts of rain or bursts of rain in the last couple of weeks or couple of days, that they might actually help to break down the slurry that is there. I suppose the tendency probably between tedding and mowing as well is that it'll probably break up a small bit, so it won't be in lumps inside in the pit. And I would hope that if we could get sugar levels up to where they need to be, I suppose in that 3+ region, we should be able to wilt it fast enough that preservation wouldn't be compromised by it. So it's not a great answer to your question, but I suppose there's nothing you can do right now to correct that if a silage crop is due to be cut in the next week or two to break that up. It's just hope that nature basically will try and do enough flogging of it with rain in the next couple of days to soften it up and break it up so that it isn't coming back in the crop. But it's a valid question. So just, I suppose, the question that's going to be on a lot of people's minds in the next couple of days as well, again, given the broken weather that we have, do you need it to use an additive? And again, look, this can be very case specific. I know some people that will always use an additive almost regardless of conditions. and then there are people that never use additive and can make quite good quality silage. And again, I'll refer you to the silage manual from the point of view of there's a great stepwise approach to this. I'll go through it here, but if you want to look at it, as I said, just use Google to find the silage manual and have a look through it. So the risk factors for poor insolubility. So as the higher quality silage can be harder to ensoil, obviously, and many of you will see that with the bales that you take off the platform, especially where there's high levels of N after being used, maybe. So not happened so much this year because we haven't had that burst of growth just yet. So the nitrogen can sometimes be still in those crops and they turn into black kind of silage, but stocks still eat them quite well. Some people are tending to put additive on them to help them to preserve. There are shorter N application intervals, so I suppose I would imagine that most of this fertilizer for silage went out relatively early this year, but I suppose there is a risk of where people have grazed silage ground for maybe a second time this year that they top up the silage, the nitrogen application there, and that they could have a short application interval between their nitrogen and their cutting. And then lack of sunshine obviously is another thing. So we need sunshine to drive on the dry matter side of things, and also to increase sugar levels as well. So just I suppose we'd advocate that people would test grass for sugars more so than the nitrate. High quality silage can often be made without additives, as it says here. Big problem with additives, I suppose, is acid. I remember as a young fella, you used to see the drums of the 200-litre drums of acid going around on the back of the harvesters, and the backs of the harvesters were all burnt and corroded from using the acid. You no longer get that, and because people aren't willing to take that risk with the machinery, given that they're costing 315,000, 400,000 to buy them, obviously. So no one additive is ideal in all circumstances, and there's the different types of additives around here, and we'll look at them in a second. And I suppose you have to make your decisions based on the conditions around the time that you're cutting, and ideally you shouldn't start the process, obviously, if you're not going to be able to finish it. So that can be very challenging. In years like 2009, we had very, very wet conditions, and it was very challenging to make silage indoors. So maybe the role of the additive might come into play there, and you go for a smash and grab kind of scenario and use your additive to try and help with the insolubility piece. So where is an additive required? If the sugar levels are 2 to 3% and elevated nitrate, so greater than the 600 parts per million, wilting isn't an option. You will need an additive. If you can wilt it to above that 28%, so as I said, maybe cut it into your 10-foot swarts and then take it as quickly as possible to get it dried, you won't necessarily need an additive. If you have good conditions, so what really suits it is when you get kind of mild, warm nights and sugar levels are good in the grass. And your sugar levels can be quite high there. They can be, we often see 5-6% sugars especially in reseeded swards, as was pointed out there by Emma Louise earlier. The older grasses tend to have lower sugar levels. So where we do get the reseeded swards with good sugar levels, they actually can preserve quite well without an additive. However, if we have sugar levels that are low, and it's going to be hard to try and, as I said, get that wilt in order to increase them as well, the additive can be required. So the types of additives, just need to move this way here for me. Types of additives vary from molasses. As I said, acid is something that you just do not see anymore. Absorbents, which would be your beet pulps and your hulls and so forth, people are mixing those through pits. But again, it's like in most of the cases with these, it's the feasibility and the actual practicality of doing these can be quite difficult. So I suppose molasses is something that can be done. People carry, I've seen people using IBCs, we'll say, with a tap on it, and they drive up and down the pit and layer on a layer of this in and out between trailers been tipped onto the pit. But again, that's a big commitment, I suppose, in terms of the effort that's required to do that. So it's not exactly very easy to do it. Some guys can apply some molasses, I think, or apply molasses to the swart as well, as what I've seen being done as well. Acid, as I said, just doesn't exist as far as I can see anymore, given the damage that it was doing to machinery and everything like that. And acid and the risk, obviously, the health and safety risk to people handling that and getting burnt. It was quite a good way of doing, of preserving silage, obviously, and it was very common many years ago, but the risks associated with it, I've seen it removed altogether, more or less. And then your inoculants, I suppose, they increase the lactic acid bacteria population that's there, and that's going to drop your pH quickly. You need to have good conditions, I suppose, because they don't tend to help in that kind of a scenario where you don't have very good conditions. And then also you need to be in a situation where you have good, like using an additive isn't going to make bad quality silage good, is the other thing that needs to be pointed out again. So if we're in a situation where we're cutting 66% DMD type silage, so we go back to our grass phases again and we look at this one, if we're cutting this type of material, using a silage additive is probably the greatest waste of money you could think of, because this is going to have quite good insolubility because it's been growing so long in reality, and adding the silage to, or the additive to it, isn't going to make it a better quality silage. So that's pretty much it. I suppose just to wrap up, there's one or two questions in there. We're cutting at a slightly higher height, decrease the impact for losses of P and K. I suppose that I don't really think that there's any advantage in that, to be honest. P and K is going to be gone into the crop pretty much, and you also want to get a clean sward, so cutting it high, unless you're in a red clover scenario, would be advocating that people will cut as tightly as possible to get a good clean base for the next crop. And just one other final question, I suppose, in relation to preserving silage in the pit, then would salt help to preserve silage in a pit from Donald Organ? Yes, Donald, I suppose it's something that's worth doing, especially along the top of a pit. I think it does help to influence the kind of the impact of losses on the top of the pit. And as I said, I'm hoping to cover a piece on it there next week. But what I think is a very good thing, and Tom Fallon and Francis Quigley had an article in Today's Farm about it lately, is the likes of the cling film, which is going to attach very quickly to the top of the sward or to the top of the pit, eliminate the air pockets in it. Salt will help as well to remove moisture from that as well. So it can, and it's quite cheap as well. So I think salt on the top of a pit and along the sides of it is a very cheap investment into trying to improve the preservation in it potentially as well. So look, I think we'll wrap it up at that. That's all the questions. We'll be back next week again, and I'll either be talking about how to manage grass next week, or maybe covering that preservation piece in relation to the silage. Just kind of want to watch what way the week is panning out, because I think grass is beginning to take off, and there might be worth looking at a piece on that next week, in order to, because the way it's going to come, given the way the conditions have been all coming up together, there's a bit of a management strategy going to be needed to try and get ahead of it before it gets ahead of us. So wish you all well for the week, and thanks for tuning in such good numbers, and apologies for the slight delay at the start. We look forward to talking to you all again next week, and stay safe in the meantime. Thank you.